This is the Insta360 1R, and it may be the most innovative camera I've seen in a really long time. It's a 360 camera. A 4K GoPro styled action camera. And a 5.3K vlogging camera. The 1R is probably the most interesting and complex camera system that I've ever reviewed on this channel. This modular design makes this a multi-purpose camera, and it gives you the ability to upgrade it in the future. Unlike, for example, GoPro, where when a new GoPro comes out, you gotta buy the whole camera. With the Insta360 1R, you can just upgrade the sensor or upgrade the brains or buy a better battery, or who knows what other modules they'll create for it in the future. That makes it a lot more affordable in the long run when you don't have to buy the whole camera every single time. Plus, speaking of price, right now they're selling it for $479 for both the 360 camera and the 4K module, which is actually cheaper than just the GoPro Max 360 camera, which, if you guys saw the review, in my opinion, the 360 camera alone is already better for Insta360. But actually, it gets even better. We're gonna be giving away 5 of these on this channel. We're gonna give away 3 of them on my YouTube, 1 on Instagram and 1 on Twitter. All you have to do is just follow my socials, follow me on YouTube, on Twitter and Instagram, and follow me on Twitch because I'm streaming on there also. And then go and follow Insta360's YouTube account and you'll be entered. I'm gonna be giving 5 of these guys out, so there's a higher chance that you're actually gonna get one for free. Okay, so basically how this camera works is that there are different modules that you can put together in different combinations. So this is the brain. It's also got the LCD screen. This is where the processing happens. Then we have the cameras and sensors. So here's the 4K. This is a 1-inch sensor with a Leica lens, and this is the 360 camera right here. So we can put together a camera, lens, sensor, and the brain. And then we have the battery, which holds it all together. So we can just combine, for example, this 1-inch sensor, the brain, and then a battery, and you're good to go. Now there is also a cage for extra protection, but also now to mount it to the stick or whatever you're gonna mount it to. And they also created little lens covers for the 360 camera, which is really great because I've actually broken, I believe, 3 Insta360 1Xs, these older 360 cameras. Actually, this one is, I think, broken. Yep, scratched lens. The lenses get scratched very easy, and one I did drop into an elliptical machine and break that way. Also, I've never broken any other cameras other than these Insta360 1Xs. I think I just treat them a little rough. So it is great having that extra protection for your camera, but also I'm kind of not a fan of these cages with GoPros and other cameras. It's just one extra thing that you have to deal with and putting it in there. I really liked how the Insta360 1X, you could just straight mount onto the camera like so without needing any other cages or accessories. And like I said, right now they come with 3 different camera modules. They have the 360 camera, the 4K camera, and this 1-inch sensor with a Leica lens on it. And this one to me was the most interesting because it is a lot bigger of a sensor than on, let's say, a GoPro. So I'm really curious to see what the quality is like coming out of this 1-inch sensor. And by the way, this whole thing is somehow waterproof, which is again a welcome thing. I definitely risked this a few times getting too close to water, so this being waterproof is really great. The modular system is really great, not only just for the future upgrades, but also the versatility in how you use this camera. For example, I love using the 360 camera for action stuff. If I'm jet skiing or on a snowboard or anything like that, it's really awesome. I could see myself using the 4K camera for underwater stuff. And then if I'm vlogging, maybe I would use the 1-inch sensor because it is a higher quality sensor. And who knows what other kinds of modules they'll create in the future. Also very smart. So there is only one LCD screen, but if you wanted to, let's say, vlog, you can simply flip it around and now you have a front-facing screen. So that's really smart. Now the LCD screen is a little bit small, so sometimes it is a little bit hard to work with, but one of the great things is that it actually also works with the 360 camera. You can see what you're filming, and not only that, you can actually move it around and look all over wherever the 360 camera is seeing. So that is really handy. The GoPro Max, you cannot do that, even though you can see one frame, but it's just pointing one direction. You can't move it around or anything like that. I absolutely fell in love with 360 cameras last year. I really understood the power and the kinds of shots that you can get that have never been possible before with a 360 camera. So having not only a 360 camera, but also these other modules in one package is really cool. But none of this matters if the quality isn't good. So let's talk about image quality. And now this is a pre-production version, so keep in mind there might be some things that the firmware in the future will fix, and right now it's just not working as well. So keep that in mind. First off, the 360 camera, it is actually the same cameras and sensors as on the One X. So you wouldn't expect too much of a difference, but at first glance, there is definitely a difference. It looks like it's a little bit higher quality, probably because of the new codec. And also I feel like the color science is a little bit different right now. It seems like it's a little bit more saturated and a little bit more contrasty. So it's just a little bit better straight out of camera, which I think is really great. The footage looks better, but there are a few issues, at least right now. The stitching isn't as good as on the One X right now. And again, this could be a pre-production issue, but a lot of the stitching, it's not doing it as well. It's cutting out some spots and it's just having a lot of trouble. And also we noticed some flickering and some weird stuff happening. Again, some of this stuff could be firmware issues and probably will be fixed in the future. But I think some of this is actually a bit of a design flaw, and I'll show you what I mean. So typically with the Insta360 One X, you would mount the camera like this and the lenses would be directly over this pole. So it's a lot easier for it to then stitch out the pole, and it works really cool. You don't see the pole, you just see this camera kind of floating out there in space, which I love that effect. But with the One R, the camera actually sits a little bit to the side. It's not directly over the stick, so it's gonna be harder for it to stitch out. I think it's gonna have to combine more of the two cameras in order to stitch out the stick. And I believe the longer the stick gets, the harder it would get for the camera to stitch out the stick. So I think that's where some of the issues right now are happening with the stitching and why it's not able to do it as well. I'm a little bit curious why they didn't just go vertically like this instead of horizontally. And they could have even put the cage mount right below the camera so it would be perfect, just like on the Insta360 One X. I'm a little bit curious why they didn't go that route. I don't know if it's just they wanted to kind of stay in the GoPro style, the familiar look, instead of going vertical like this. It might be kind of weird for people. And this is just a theory of mine. I'm not some crazy scientist, physics dude. I don't know for sure, but that's just a theory of mine right now, that would be the reason why they're having a hard time stitching it, because the stitching is great on the One X, so I would think it would be no problem for the One R. And I think it has to do with the difference in the build. Hopefully they can fix some of that in firmware, or they could just make a cage that you can mount it from the side. That would fix it. Insta360, you're welcome. The 4K camera, it's not bad. It's kind of like a normal, typical GoPro or DJI Osmo Action quality. It shoots 4K in 60, 2.7K up to 100 frames per second, and you get 200 frames in 1080. And when I was comparing the 4K camera to a GoPro Hero 7, I don't have a Hero 8, it did look like there was more detail on the One R 4K camera, so that was a nice surprise. Now, I didn't have a Hero 8 to compare it to. Maybe it's very similar to the Hero 8, but the point here is that I would have no problems using this over a GoPro. They seem to have also improved the low light, especially with the stitching. There's a problem with low light and slower shutter speeds. There's a lot more blur going on with the shutter, and so that's a really tricky thing when you're trying to match two different cameras, but they seem to have improved that a little bit, so that's nice. Still, 360 cameras aren't very good for low light. And then we get to the 1-inch sensor, the real wild card. GoPros, for example, use about a 1/2-inch sensor, so this is quite a bit bigger than what we're normally used to in a action camera. And right away I was thinking, maybe this could be a vlogging camera because it's going to be higher quality. And it's true, it is a lot higher quality. There's a noticeable difference in quality, at least when we're looking at the footage on the computer side by side. I don't know how YouTube is going to treat it. There's a big difference in the quality of the footage. And it's 5.3K, which is pretty crazy, but there are a few problems, and probably the biggest one is minimum focus distance. So when you're vlogging with this 1-inch sensor, kind of holding it out normally, it's capturing me perfectly, but the focus is actually just on the background and I am completely out of focus. And it's more apparent than ever because it's a bigger sensor. The GoPros do the same thing, but now you can see it more obviously because of the bigger sensor. So that right away kind of makes it unusable for vlogging. I don't know if there's a way where they can have two different settings, you know, like a vlogging setting and then like a further out distance. I don't know exactly how it would work in something like this. So that was a bit of a bummer because the quality is super nice, but I'm just out of focus. It can also do 60 frames per second in 4K, and in 1080 it can do 120 frames, which is nice. So that's the quality. There seems to be some issues still. It's like, it'd be really great, but this little issue. This would be really great, but there's this little issue. It doesn't seem quite perfect right now. It almost seems like they needed a couple more months to kind of work out the kinks. I think because of CES, they wanted to announce it at CES and make a big splash, and they definitely did. But I think they could have used at least a few more months to kind of tweak things and make sure that the firmware is really working and just figuring out some of these bugs right now. Next, let's talk about sound. It seems like the sound quality is a little bit better in my opinion. Not always. There's times when wind and stuff makes it very, very unusable. All right, so this is the 1-inch sensor with the Leica camera, and we're gonna do some stabilization tests and also just compare the different looks of all the different combinations you can have with this thing. We got this new longboard sensor, the X-Way, so Matt here is gonna test this thing out and do a full review on the X-Way. But interestingly enough, they're making it so you can actually connect a Bluetooth mic to this camera. So in theory, you're gonna be able to connect, for example, your AirPods and record through there straight into the camera. And that makes it really, really interesting, especially with this 1-inch sensor. If they can figure out that minimum focus distance, this could become a real powerhouse vlogging machine when you're, let's say, traveling and you don't wanna be carrying around a big camera. You're on planes and there's just a lot going on. It would be so much easier to just use this little camera and then have your AirPods picking up the audio. Workflow wise, it's really similar to what you're used to. They do have auto track, which is really quick. You just select a person or an object and it'll track that, and it works really well. Sometimes it messes up and it starts following somebody else, but overall with the 360 footage, it works pretty well. They also have the point to track now, so you can actually just point it at somebody or an object and you can say, mark that.
Mark that. Oh, it worked. Oh, it works.
And then you can film your clip, and then when you go into the app, it'll actually auto track it to that object that you pointed at. So that is another really nice feature. Autoframe uses AI and crazy technology to kind of figure out what would be good shots, and it selects those for you from the 360 footage. And they have flash cut auto editing, which will take those clips and make a sequence for you. Now, these are all great features. I don't usually use these kinds of things too often, but anything that makes the 360 workflow a little bit faster, I think is a welcome addition. And there's a ton of other little features which I didn't really have time to test out yet. Things like stop motion, jump planet, time flip, roll planet, star lapse. And they added a new feature called Color Plus, and this basically just makes the footage a little bit more usable straight at a camera. From what I've seen, basically it just adds a little bit more saturation and contrast, but sometimes, for example, the skin tones didn't look as good. So again, I probably wouldn't use it. I would just use the footage normally and then just do the work of color grading it a little bit. As I'm talking about this, there are a lot of features. I didn't even talk about, you can actually make your drone now a 360 camera. So they're gonna have a mod where you attach one 360 camera above the drone and one below, and it'll essentially stitch out your drone and have this crazy 360 camera drone thing. Just really, really interesting stuff they're able to do because of this modular system. I love it. I think 360 cameras are super underrated. The price is reasonable, although the 1-inch sensor is $300 extra, so that is quite a bit more, but it's honestly crazy, especially looking at the 360 footage. Like, there's no need for a gimbal in so many situations. I was just kind of like waving my little 360 wand around and getting all of these really, really cool shots that are so perfectly stabilized. To me, it is by far the best action camera. Unlimited angles, so easy to use, invisible stick. There's just so many reasons to use a 360 camera as your action camera. I would say this is a good start to 2020. Well done, Insta360, on really trying to innovate and do something different. I'm very, very impressed. And I highly recommend checking this out, trying it out. I'm hoping firmware will fix some of the bugs and this will be the system that I carry around in my camera backpack. And I might not have a use for a GoPro anymore, so anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.